Virgo, the week of July 26th to August 1st, 2026, centers on a genuine tension between overwork and rest, and it lands directly in the two houses that matter most for that exact question. Venus is sitting in your own sign this week, giving you a real boost of personal magnetism and self-possession. But the full moon on July 29th lands in Aquarius, conjunct Pluto, in your sixth house of daily work and health, forming an exact opposition to the Sun's rare conjunction with Jupiter in your 12th house of rest and the subconscious. Saturn also stations exactly retrograde on July 26th at 14 degrees Aries, joining Neptune in your 8th house of intimacy and shared resources, and the lunar nodes shift axis this same week. Several of the year's biggest astrological storylines converge within these 7 days. And for you specifically, they all seem to be circling the same underlying question about how much you actually let yourself stop. Let's go through what all of this actually means for your money, your relationships, and your energy, using the real sky, not generic guesswork. Money and career move with real decisiveness this week, thanks to Mars in Gemini sitting in your 10th house of career and public standing. This is a strong placement for taking direct action on something professional, pitching an idea, pushing a decision forward, or simply being visibly productive rather than quietly efficient the way you usually prefer. Mars here rewards being seen doing the work, not just doing it well behind the scenes, which can feel slightly uncomfortable if self-promotion isn't your natural style, but it will genuinely pay off this week if you push past that discomfort. Mercury, meanwhile, sits in Cancer, your 11th house of friends and long-term goals, bringing genuine clarity to conversations about where your career is actually heading versus where you've been assuming it's heading out of habit. This is a good week to actually talk through a long-term plan with someone you trust rather than continuing to refine it alone in your own head, which is your more natural instinct. A friend or colleague may offer a piece of perspective this week that reframes something you've been overthinking privately for far too long. Early in the week, while the moon sits in Capricorn, your 5th house of creativity and self-expression, use the steadier mood there for a creative task that's been sitting on your list. Mars, in your career house, arrives with more force mid-week, so getting ahead of any personal projects before then will help you avoid feeling stretched too thin once Wednesday's bigger events land. Relationships carry a specific, sharp tension this week through an exact Venus-Mars square on July 28th into the 29th. Venus, sitting directly in your own sign, represents your personal wants and your own sense of self right now, while Mars in Gemini sits in your 10th house of career and public reputation. The square between them means your personal desires and your public, professional obligations are genuinely pulling against each other this week. You may feel torn between wanting quiet time for yourself, which Venus in your own sign naturally craves, and the demands of showing up professionally, which Mars is pushing hard on. If you're partnered, this can show up as a partner noticing you're more withdrawn or self-focused than usual. Not because anything is wrong between you, but because Venus in your own sign is genuinely asking for more personal attention this week than you typically allow yourself. Naming that plainly will land better than either over-explaining it or simply disappearing into yourself without saying why. If you're single, this square might show up as reluctance to put energy into dating or connecting while you're public and professional. Life is asking for so much of you already. That's a legitimate reason to pull back this week, rather than something to feel guilty about. Virgo often mistakes needing space for failing at connection, when this week it's simply an honest response to genuinely competing demands on your time and attention. Energy and health are where the real story of the week lives, and it's a classic Virgo tension made unusually explicit. The full moon on July 29th lands in your 6th house of daily work, routine, and health, conjunct Pluto. in exact opposition to the Sun-Jupiter conjunction in your 12th house of rest and the subconscious. This is essentially the sky asking, in the most direct way it can, whether your relationship to work and routine has become so intense that it's eating into the rest your body and mind actually need. Pluto's presence here suggests this isn't a small passing observation. A pattern around overwork, perfectionism, or an inability to switch off may come to a genuine head this week, possibly through actual exhaustion, a health signal your body sends that's hard to ignore, or simply a moment of clarity about how unsustainable your current pace has become. This is exactly the kind of full moon that tends to arrive as an actual physical symptom for Virgo specifically, a headache, a flare-up, a sudden wave of tiredness that won't be argued with, precisely because your sign so often tries to reason its way past bodily signals rather than simply listening to them. Saturn and Neptune, meanwhile, station and sit retrograde together in your 8th house of intimacy and shared resources, adding a quieter undertone about how much you actually let yourself depend on someone else rather than managing everything solo. Rest this week isn't a luxury, it's the specific instruction embedded in the sky. If you can, actually schedule a block of unstructured time this week, rather than leaving rest to whatever's left over once every task is checked off. Since, for Virgo, that leftover time has a way of never actually arriving. There's a longer story underneath this single week worth naming briefly, and it's an unusually fitting one for you. The lunar nodes shifting onto the Aquarius-Leo axis lands the North Node in your 6th house of health and daily routine, and the South Node in your 12th house of rest and withdrawal. For the next 18 months, your growth edge actually favors the direction. Virgo already leans toward naturally building genuinely sustainable structure and service into your daily life, while the pull to retreat, isolate, or simply disappear into rest as an escape is the more familiar, well-worn path the nodes are asking you to move beyond. This is an interesting distinction worth sitting with. The North Node isn't asking you to abandon your natural gifts for order and routine. It's asking you to actually inhabit them fully and sustainably, rather than using isolation as the default relief valve whenever things get overwhelming. This week's full moon is essentially a preview of that longer conversation, arriving early and loudly, rather than waiting quietly in the background the way nodal themes usually do. So here's where this actually leaves you, Virgo. Heading into August, Mars is asking you to show up visibly at work. Venus is asking for real personal attention and quiet, and the full moon, landing squarely between your work house and your rest house, is asking you to actually notice which one you've been shortchanging lately, rather than letting the imbalance continue unexamined. If you take one thing from this week, let it be permission, real permission, not the kind you grant yourself only after everything else is finished to stop before you're forced to. If this reading resonated with you, hit like and subscribe.